one of the points you make in your book is that, and I think your book came out around the time that China and the U.S. had achieved rough parity in terms of purchasing power parity, their GDP.
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah, roughly. And I remember one of the points you made is that China has 4 times the population of the U.S., so its per capita GDP was 1/4 that of the U.S. If they merely got to the point of having half the per capita GDP of the U.S., then their economy would be twice as big as ours.
Right.
And China has a lot of really smart, hardworking people who are studying subjects that we aren't studying as much as we should in the U.S., like engineering, like science, and so forth. So there are reasons, I think, to believe that their incredible rise could derail. The demographics are a problem. Maybe if the economy becomes too centrally controlled. But let's just assume that it does continue its rise. I guess the question would be, will the U.S. have to effectively recognize that they have a sphere of influence in Asia in order to avoid a war? I mean, is that what we're going to have to do?
I think, so I appreciate your starting with the basics.
Yeah.
And structural realities are hard to deny. So again, the Americans don't like this, but just do the arithmetic. If their economy is only half as productive as ours, and these are pretty talented people and they work pretty hard, they'll have a GDP twice ours. I'll do it again. Wait a minute, twice ours. Now you're in a rivalry between A and B has twice the GDP. So it can have twice the size of the defense budget. It can have twice the intelligence budget.
Right.
It can have twice, okay? Well, that's reality. Now, can I find enough allied and aligned on my side to make up for some of that? Yeah, that seems right. So that's one way. So your alliances
so we need
could
an
be
alliance strategy more than they do.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
We need it, okay? But if you said over time, in relationships like that, if you're going to avoid war, will there be, a sphere of influence, again, there's a great abstract debate about this, but in reality, the sphere of influence is the shadow that power casts in some realm. So if you're more powerful, you have a sphere of influence. So in the South China Sea today, on the Chinese border, they have more ships, they have more missiles on the land. So lo and behold, we don't call that their sphere of influence, but if you look and see what happens in the area, we don't operate our ships the way we did when I was in the Pentagon in the Clinton administration. So if there were an event in Taiwan, which is 90 miles off their shore, like Cuba is on our shore, and halfway around the world for us, the likelihood we're going to have the ships and the planes and the other, that just doesn't work that way. You can look at the geography and see the tyranny of it. So will there come to be some degree of difference and accommodation if a war is to be avoided? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Now then then it becomes ugly because you say, in what respect? And I know you guys, I saw earlier did the question for Robert Kennedy about Taiwan. Okay, I think that's a good question not to answer. Not to answer.
Right. Yeah, this is where I worry about the competence of our foreign policy establishment, because I think it only has one gear, which is forward and double down. In the United States, we have a doctrine, the Monroe Doctrine, which says that no distant great power can bring troops, weapons, or bases into our hemisphere, because we do not tolerate other great powers having security threats amassed on our border. But our foreign policy establishment cannot comprehend that other great powers want a similar Monroe Doctrine. I think that was a huge contributor to the war we have in Ukraine right now.
Yeah. So we have this theory. I'm part of this establishment that you're talking about, and it's not.
So why did you invade Ukraine?
It's not.
That's such a gross simplification.
It's not as uniform as you say, and it's not always as unsuccessful as you say. But overall, I think you're more right than wrong. So basically, we say we're the exceptional nation. So what does that mean? That means we make the rules, and you're supposed to obey the rules. But we don't obey the rules. So we say we're for the rule-based order. Excuse me, the rule-based order was the basis on which we invaded Iraq? I don't think so. That we occupied Afghanistan? I don't think so. So the U.S. has made a lot of mistakes of unnecessary wars. And a lot of the a lot of the unnecessary wars was because people with wrong ideas dominated people with right ideas, but there was a debate and a discussion. So we need more people with the right ideas, getting into the conversation in an active way. But let me just do one other footnote here. So this, we have to remember, this is 9/11, okay? So this is a big day for me, okay? This is a day on which airplanes hijacked by terrorists killed 3,000 people at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, including many people that I know extremely well. What would a world be like in which that happened every day or every week or every month? We'd be totally intolerable. We wouldn't be doing what we're doing. Why is that not happening? Some people did some right things. So there's been a pretty active program by the U.S., some of it with some mistakes, but overall, that's played a significant role in the fact that people who plan and train to conduct major terrorist attacks on the U.S. are taken off the chessboard. Every day people go out hunting. Every day people find people. And I would say, thank goodness for this.
Well, so I think that's an interesting point. Certainly Al-Qaeda hasn't been able to hit us again in that way. I do wonder whether there were two tragedies on 9/11. One was the thousands of people who died. The other was the way that we reacted to it. Like you said, we went into Iraq, a total non sequitur.
Stupid, yes.
Stupid and a non sequitur, and then we stayed in Afghanistan for 20 years.
And again, not necessary.
Yeah, on sort of the nation-building grounds. We then went into Syria. That's still going on. There was Libya. So and there was very little debate about all of these things at the time we made these decisions. It's almost like the U.S. foreign policy establishment, in reaction to 9/11, became almost deranged. And compared to, say, the 1990s, where I think there were real foreign policy debates, there was a real foreign policy debate in the 90s on NATO expansion. It doesn't seem like we have that many debates, not within the policy elite. Maybe we're having them, but it doesn't seem like the policy elite debates anything anymore. It's just this sort of bellicose, hawkish rhetoric at all times.
Do you agree with that, Graham? And from the inside?
I mean, again, I live on the other side. I live on both sides of this curtain. And I would say inside, there's much more debate, and there was much more debate than we take credit for. George Bush made a terrible, terrible, terrible mistake in invading Iraq in 2003. Who said that to him? His father's closest advisor, Brent Scowcroft, who was joined at the hip with the father, said to him, "This is a terrible, dumb mistake." He even went so far as to write an op-ed about it after he did not write an op-ed without talking to Bush's father. Would George H.W. Bush have done this? No. If the count had gone right in Florida and Gore had been president, would we have gone into Iraq? No. So electing the right president and having the right, so if it had been the Bush 41 team, rather than the Bush 43 team, we wouldn't have made that mistake. So
you mentioned this RFK clip. One of the things that he says is that we've gotten things backwards now, where there's a military-industrial complex that essentially wants to maximize revenue. That's like logical in the capitalist system. But then what it's done is it's perverted the intelligence gathering institutions to essentially be writing the justifications for these wars before these wars happen. Is that conspiracy theory, or is that?
I'd say it's complicated. So,
but it's not a no.
I think
it's not a no, is what you're saying.
No, it's
why is it complicated?
We live in an extremely dangerous world.
But do we
this year?
No, but Grant, can I ask you, do we really though?
Absolutely.
Really?
Had thousands of people not been taken off the chessboard, you would have seen many repeats of 9/11.
Okay.
And if you were living in a place, and somebody I know was trying to make a last trade on the morning of 9/11, and a plane crashes in,
right,
and the building is knocked down, all of a sudden the conversation changes. So there's that.
Yeah, I don't wanna
Now,
take the
wait,
gravity
secondly,
away from it,
wait,
yeah.
wait, that's the terrorist piece. Let's take war. This is the other big event. Most people don't realize. This month is the anniversary of the end of World War II and the beginning of 78 years in which there's not been another great power war.
Right.
Excuse me, in history, that's almost unheard of. Why is that? Answer, well, a lot of good fortune, a lot of grace, but also lots of things that the U.S. did successfully. So I think that the security dominates everything when you don't have security. And the geopolitics to provide security is very complicated. Now, the structures that do that often end up making big mistakes too. So I'm not trying to make excuse for the mistakes, but I think the overall of it is that the security order that's been built in the past and survived for the last 70 years has been a big deal.
I grant you that. I'm just, but when do you go back?
Based on what Chamath said there, which is, through the framing Chamath has here, we have this military-industrial complex, we have this complicated relationship with China, and then we have Taiwan. And we have this incredible policy of ambiguity, and it seemed to be working really well. And now, are we having the proper debate on Taiwan? What is the debate we should be having on defending Taiwan, not defending Taiwan, providing them with arms? Because you seem to believe in the book that this is going to be
That's a great.
what it's about.
Let me add to that question, and this is going to be our last question because we do need to move on. In your role in defense planning, and you look at the Department of Defense today in the U.S. defense industrial complex, are we equipped for a hot conflict with China? And if we're not, does that change the positioning and the strategy that China then has in how they think about what they're going to do next with the U.S.?
So the first one is no, we're not, and it certainly impacts China. And in fact, I think if you were able to greenfield the Defense Department today for half the money, you could get twice the bang for the buck.
Yep.
No, so bureaucracies are complicated, difficult. The fact that we haven't had another great power war, I'm prepared to pay a little extra for, but if you said how efficient is it, not so much. And into I think the big question we should ask ourselves is, for rational actors in Washington or here today, us, and in Beijing, are there more reasons, more incentives to compete between the U.S. and China? Or alternatively, more incentives to cooperate?
Right.
So we've been through all the ones to compete, but for cooperating, excuse me, if we have a war, we destroy ourselves. So we have a pretty powerful interest in survival in not having a war and not allowing us something happen in Taiwan or this or that. If we live in an enclosed biosphere on a small planet, either party's greenhouse gas emission can make the place unlivable for both of us if we don't find a way to cooperate in dealing with that. We have a financial system that's so entangled that a financial crisis one place can become a depression everywhere. So if we don't find a way to do it. So I would say it's a good assignment for everybody. Make your list of the reasons, incentives to compete, and turn the sheet over, incentives to cooperate.
Yeah.
And we need a lot more strategic imagination in that space.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping some of you guys and other folks will put some of their gray cells onto that problem.
Instead of this de facto posturing that everyone seems to hold today, that we're going to go to war, this is our enemy,
Right.
and just be a little more thoughtful about the long-term relationship. Graham Allison, thank you so much.
Amazing. That was absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. Wow. Another standing ovation. Besties are back.